Hello and welcome back to ESPN Scrum Reset. It's Sam Bruce, joined as ever by Christy Doran, this time following round 3 of the Rugby Championship, where we had fantastic few hours of rugby between in both Adelaide and Christchurch on Saturday afternoon and evening. Plenty of talking points to get into as usual. Christy, mate, you're over in Adelaide. Just set the scene for us. How was the crowd?
I'll tell you what, it's not even midday. It's probably 11:30-ish local time in Adelaide, and you're walking from the city across the beautiful bridge and river there, and it's such a gorgeous city. And I'd never been there, and I kind of all these years watching cricket, and you get a bit of a feel about it, the city of churches, and they talk about the lunches and the long afternoons in Adelaide, but you really got that feel about it. And there was such a nice atmosphere, even at 11:30, and this is 45 minutes before the women are running onto the field, and it's a few hours before the main big kind of game, the reason why we're kind of there between the Wallabies and the Springboks, and it already had that atmosphere about it. And 36,000 people, so well short of capacity, but it had that feel of this is a big vibe, and that there's an interested crowd, that there is plenty of gold, and it was great for afternoon rugby, and that was something to savour. And you can't do it every year. You can't even do it every second year, having a Wallabies test there, given where the game is largely played. But with the World Cup on the horizon, I thought it was a great show and something to get around, because when the World Cup does come around, you can go, Rugby Australia actually has brought a game there in the not so distant past, and they got a heck of a reminder about what the Wallabies have to offer, because there was some sparkling play, good tries, had a bit of everything, a bit of controversy, and an absolutely tackle for the ages from Marika Koroibete.
Absolutely. The only drawback being some pretty soft ratings on free-to-air television for Channel 9, I think about 250,000 metro. So that's always the trade-off. We know that. This is why we don't get much afternoon rugby, particularly much afternoon test rugby, is that the TV ratings take a mega hit. You mentioned the tackle there, Marika Koroibete. Seems like a good place to start, or at least talk about his performance in general. I can't remember a more damaging, more complete, just jaw-dropping 80 minutes, it wasn't 80 minutes, about 65, 67, I think, at the end, when he was hooked and deservedly got an early shower, Christy. Some brilliant stuff. It started early on, which I think was probably glossed over. There was a chase back, turn, collect, kick out, and he made about 30 metres with a kick. And that probably just highlights the evolution in his game, which you and I have touched on before, that when he came across from league, there was not a kicking game to be had, and slowly but surely he worked that in. And in the last season and a bit, obviously away with Robbie Deans in Japan, he's worked on that even more. But beyond that, the tackle, as you mentioned, firstly, I'll get your thoughts on that, how you saw it, and then just Marika's game in general.
Well, look, the tackle itself was electric, and the crowd there wasn't a louder moment in the match than when Marika manages to force an error from Makazole Mapimpi, who's a classy player and someone who scored in the World Cup final and knows how to get to the try line. Look, I've seen commentary around people thinking it's illegal. I don't. I really don't think it's illegal, and I'll say why. And that's, before we get to the heroics and the incredible work rate that he's done to get across to it, covering in the absence of Tom Wright, who was in the sin bin at the time, he's gone at least 50 metres along his try line to get there. And he ends up meeting Mapimpi on a 90-degree angle. Now, I don't actually know how you can get your right arm around to wrap when you're going at such force, such speed, such velocity to get across there when you present your left arm, because Mapimpi wasn't in front of Koroibete. So, he was fractionally behind him. Therefore, it was the left side of Marika Koroibete's body and arm that tackles Mapimpi, forcing the error. Now, look, I don't think he goes in there just with the shoulder. And, of course, the right arm can't wrap for the reasons I've just explained. But I think it was was incredibly acrobatic almost, and the tackle itself was so explosive, meaning that Mapimpi goes over the top. But I didn't think it was necessarily dangerous from Koroibete anyway, and I think that given the side of where he was on, it was honestly impossible to get his right shoulder and right arm across. And even if he had attempted to do so, it probably would have made it more dangerous for both men, because Koroibete would have been twisting his body in mid-flight. And, if there's a sudden change of direction from a Pimpy, which there wasn't, it could have meant that, there was more danger, a player not in control of their own body. So I had no issues with it. I thought it was play on. How did you see it? Because it has divided, those that watch the game in the rugby community.
Yeah, I think you can look at it as, we all admit it's probably not the greatest technique in the world. When you're teaching kids to tackle, it's all about putting your head in the right spot. And the head was in front of the body there, and we quite often see some concussion result from that. If Marika had got his head behind Mapimpi, so gone in, say, with his head on behind Mapimpi's right hip or buttocks, if you like, then that's probably the desired technique you're looking for there. But there's certainly a dip in the back, isn't there? There's no question of high contact. The left arm is there, and as you said, we're dealing at such speeds. Like, I think it was perfectly described by Andrew Mertens in commentary, saying that Marika it was like he'd been shot out of a cannon, and that's how he charged over like that. Now he's going all in to make that tackle, and perhaps it is a slightly too much for ask of him for him to absolutely get the timing right, so he is in a position to get his head behind Mapimpi rather than in front. But yeah, look, I thought Paul Cully's taken the Herald this afternoon is fairly spot on. I don't think under the way the laws are written now that that was an illegal tackle. And you know what? I thought it was handled very well for the officials. You and I have been on about all year about wanting speed in the game and urgency in decision making, particularly when it goes to the TMO and the match officials. So Paul Williams took one look with I think it was Brendan Pickerel, the TMO yesterday. He was happy. He saw the left arm there. I know Squidge Rugby pointed it out on social media today with a freeze frame to one particularly passionate South African fan / correspondent. So yeah, look, not as I think it best summed up as probably not the greatest technique in the world, but illegal. No.
Yeah, I agreed. And look, it was more than anything, or maybe not more than anything, but for the spectacle of the show, I thought I was so pleased that wasn't ruled illegal. And the other thing that the last point of conjecture around tackles and deliberate knockdowns, and Brendan Pickerel coming in after a try was scored and potentially ruling on a yellow card, deliberate knockdown with Noah Lolosio towards the end was ridiculous. I couldn't believe.
Well, particularly when Paul Williams had called it, said that's back at the time.
It had no reason to be called, and there was a bit of a feeling of what are we looking at here on the screen. It was quite a long delay, and it stops the momentum. And the other one probably being Nic White. Should Nic White the little slap, the little what are we going to call it there from Faf de Klerk? It wasn't a punch, maybe a strike at the very most from Faf de Klerk on Nic White. Around the time of Koroibete's incredible tackle there, gets a yellow card, and Faf de Klerk found it pretty comical himself. What did you think? Did you think it was just a bit of Hollywood theatrics? Was it worthy of a yellow card? I thought penalty at the very most would have been sufficient.
I think penalty, you and I would certainly agree on that, but you can see how Paul Williams has given it, a yellow under the laws. So it's contact with the head. Who knows how much force was there? Certainly Nic White had reacted as if he'd been hit by a dump truck. And I don't think we, certainly don't want to see that in the game. Australians all blew up when Anthony Geelong came down like a ton of bricks following that Marika hit, which earned him a red. It was later overturned, as we remember. Up in arms about that. And look, I wrote in my piece for ESPN that it was something, you'd expect to see in the English Premier League, not in the Rugby Championship. So, look, I'm sure Nick will, in hindsight, he plays on the line though, doesn't he? He's a tough competitor. He's probably got a bit of gamesmanship in him, and he might say that that's exactly what that was. It had the desired outcome. He probably didn't expect to get a yellow card, but we also teach our kids to play the whistle. And Nic in no way played the whistle there. In fact, he fell back and was definitely waiting for that in the hope that call was going to come, wasn't he? That it was going to be at least a penalty. And I thought a yellow was tough, but if to side with Paul Williams, he's probably just following the laws of the game again. So yeah, but that was two big, massive turning points in the first half, wasn't it? There after the Springboks had a sustained period of dominance for the back 20, basically, of that second quarter of the first half there. And first of all, the Koroibete hit into that tackle from Faf de Klerk, and it really, I think, sucked the life out of the Springboks.
Yeah, and it's like just closing on that point around the yellow, like it's important to note that no play or very rarely does a player go out there intentionally trying to make eye contact. It just happens. So should it be any different for when he's trying to slap down the ball as opposed to making a tackle? I don't really see the difference there, but it did look particularly, if I can use the word, soft. But look, for once, we're talking about the Wallabies having a clinical edge to them, and that's something that we don't see. But very rarely do we see. We saw it perhaps in Mendoza for a short while, even though opportunities were missed. But we think about some of the tries that were taken yesterday, and it starts after 62 seconds with Fraser McWright. But even the well taken, astute decision making from Noah Lolosio to give Marika Koroibete the space, the time to put some footwork on to get past an Andre Pollard whose defence at times is suspect. But the great try, second phase from the set play from starting with Nic White to James Slipper to Noah Lolosio, and a brilliantly finished off taken try by McWright for his second midway through the second half. We've seen this play a number of times, and we saw it even against England and Sydney, where Slipper puts Taniela Tupou through a gaping hole, and unfortunately Taniela couldn't find his it was Nick Frost on that occasion. Yep. Here we've seen a guy, a Noah Lolosio, who's a playmaker, who's got the business done. Theatrically, he's got the business done.
How I would have liked to have seen just a simple left to right pass rather than the flick, though.
I think it looks great. It probably does show the confidence that James Slipper has spoken about in the past by saying he is a confident kid.
Yep.
That was an example of that. It was quite audacious almost, but it was a straight out of the Quade Cooper kind of book. But they took their chances, and that is so important, particularly when you're playing in Australia in front of your home audiences where people are watching. And we might have spoken about the ratings not being as high as usual. Well, there were people, because I've had people text me and go, geez, weren't the Wallabies impressive? Or, what about Noah Lolosio? Or what about Tom Wright? Like people that are rugby league kind of people that weren't watching because it wasn't at prime time. So it might have been a slightly different audience that have now enjoyed it and been re-engaged with the Wallaby sides that has won.
Fraser McWright, you mentioned there, the try after the 62 seconds and then to loom up in support. We know this is a real feature of Fraser's game. His support players probably as good as any in Super Rugby Pacific this year. He's got so much speed. He also got on the ball a couple of times. There was one turnover, I think, that led to Marika's try that Hunter Paisami kicked downfield, Koroibete with a chase, and then that was the play, I think, that set up the set play try to McWright. A really busy game. He also got an early shower, and I guess we keep hearing that we certainly not going to see Michael Hooper for the Rugby Championship. Doubts about whether he'll get back at all this season. Fraser's certainly going to benefit from an extended run here. Who knows what might happen next year, but into the future, these are valuable reps for Fraser right now, aren't they?
Yeah, and you bang on the money, but what it drives home to me, and something that we've spoken about, is that when you give youth some opportunities, they can take it, and they might not take it immediately, because Noah Lolosio hasn't necessarily taken every starting opportunity with both arms. But here we've got Noah Lolosio, who's thrived on the big stage after being dropped. Here, Fraser Nic White coming in for Michael Hooper, massive shoes, dramatically comes in a couple of weeks ago, and in his third match, probably looks more comfortable out there, been given an opportunity, likely to be given more opportunities in the weeks to come. He looks so at home, I think, in the Test cauldron, and I'm glad that they chose and stuck with Fraser rather than bringing a Pete Samo in. And even, we know that Pete's a super sub, so to speak, but they could have gone, we want the bigger frame, the bigger body, because that's what South Africa do. Well, not necessarily. I think having a guy who's so good on the ball, that link play, you play to your strengths sometimes just as much as you try to curtail the opposition's strengths. And I thought that was an encouraging selection there. We're going to see more of him. And we spoke to him after the game, and he's an articulate young man who is loving life. He's had a 2.5-year wait, precious opportunities, sparing scraps of minutes on the field when games were done in Sydney. I think the game was done in Auckland as well when he came off the bench too with 10 minutes. It's a big, big moment, and to have taken it with both arms is just really, really significant, because the team is crying out for leadership, and he's a young guy that looks like he's got leadership potential behind him. So does Tate McDermott. We saw him get good minutes, and this is the final point on that, is that the Wallabies had won the game. The game was sewn up, and not often do Australians ever sew a game up to allow for 20, 25 minutes for players to come on. But it needs to be done, even if you're losing at times. You've got to back them. And I hope that they continue to back Noel Olesio in to Sydney, which I'm sure he will. But I think, why not bring Bernard Foley in on the bench? And Noah doesn't need to play 80 minutes. He could play 55 minutes. And sometimes things might be going well. And if they're not, it doesn't matter. Give the guy an opportunity to collect himself on the bench, because sometimes you can learn, having played 50 minutes, got a feel for it, and then gone, okay, there's another way to do it, or I can bring you off because you're not quite nailing it, and you can maybe learn and see how someone else goes about it.
Yeah, quite a nice exchange. I don't know if you've seen it on Instagram today between Quade Cooper and Noah Olesio, almost the father-son relationship. Basically, one for you, Dad, and I'm proud of your son. And maybe not those words, but that's basically the gist of it. Christy, clearly wasn't the perfect performance. Lineouts were just atrocious. The Wallabies, really the only way they could win one was to throw to the front. And by the front, I mean the person, whoever was standing there to start the lineout. I think it was Jed Holloway on a couple of occasions. I'm not sure it was all Palau Fainga's fault. Obviously, the Springboks have a wonderful defensive lineout. The other thing was that I don't think the Springboks can be that bad again next week in Sydney, can they? Andre Pollard looked dreadfully out of sorts. Those two simple penalty misses, you'd back him to throw those over on 9 days out of 10. He was obviously skinned by Koroibete for that try. I wonder, will Jacques and Nino consider bringing Elton Yankees in? It would be a big call, but certainly Andre looked dreadfully out of sorts.
You're right. But I said to a couple of the colleagues that were sitting next to me, and I said, when he missed the first one, and I said, often if he misses the first one, he misses a second one too. He's a very hot and cold kicker, and his overall stats actually aren't very impressive. I think he kicks around the 67 to 72% kind of ratio. When he hits the ball, when he's kicking well, he kicks it beautifully, and it's got great height. It's almost like a golfer with a 5-iron, and it pings. But at times he can shank them a bit, and we saw that. And if those penalties go over, if Mapimpi scores that try, it has to feel like it could be a different game. I agree. I don't think South Africa can be much worse. The amount of line-out ball that they overturned, the scrum dominance that they had, you suspect that if they can nail some of those basics, like they looked very, very threatening for about a 15-minute period between the 15th to the 35th minute, really. And Nic White came up with a huge breakdown steal there. And I don't know if he was necessarily awarded for that penalty. I think there was something else right there.
Tackle. Faf got him around the chops,
but I thought he had hands on the ball anyway, and he wasn't necessarily even allowed to get hands on the ball because the Springbok didn't release the ball. I think it was Lou Diego from memory. So it could have been a penalty in three different ways, but you're right. They won't be much worse. You imagine a couple of changes will take place. It's a big match for the Springboks, and if the Wallabies can win this, look, you wouldn't rule them out of going on for the championship. But this is an exciting moment for Australian rugby to go. Can you take it? Can you take this moment in Sydney where you've won one match since 2015, and that was against, I think it was Samoa in 2019 ahead of the World Cup. It is a hugely important game to try to win back the faithful in Sydney, because brand new spanking ground at Sydney Football Stadium, 40,000 people will be there Saturday evening. Huge game ahead of a Bledisloe series.
Yeah, can't wait. I wonder, will they consider bringing Cogger Smith in? Obviously came off the bench. We know, he's a bit like Pete Samu. He's an impact player. He can really come on, and he's got the sevens background, very busy. Would they consider playing he and Sia Khaleesi alongside to perhaps, combat what is probably a slightly more mobile Wallabies pack? Obviously, as you mentioned, Lud Diega and even Etzebeth are probably the premier locking combination in the world, or certainly one of the best, and they combine superbly with some tip-on passes. But I'm not sure Peter Steph Toy is absolutely at his best at the minute. Off a couple of back-to-back injuries, I think, while playing for the Stormers, is he? Or is he?
I think it's still, he might have left recently, but I agree. I think he is just slightly off the pace. He was World Rugby Player of the Year from memory in 2019, and then has had a pretty injury-ravaged couple of years. I think you're right.
So interesting to see what happens, but I can't wait to Saturday, isn't it? Hopefully we get a day like we've got here, a Sunday afternoon right now next Saturday. The opening is taking place as we speak, the open day, a couple of concerts on, and my nephew's actually got to start out playing a bit of rugby to kick it all off. So he's the first Bruce to get on a major stadium. Congrats to you, young Toby. Can't wait. Saturday night should be brilliant, mate.
Yeah, it should be exciting. And I just said, look, they've got to take this moment. There's been so many times where the Wallabies have threatened. Now it's important to kick on. And Dave Rennie and James Slipper spoke just about that yesterday afternoon, their post-match press conference. You get the feeling that the review, brutal review that they described coming off the back of San Juan has kind of struck a nerve. And I think that's as well because you've seen Matt Taylor essentially forced out of the Wallabies coaching structure. He might be, and he is respected. He's particularly respected by the Reds class of 2011. But Laurie Fisher's introduction there, he's a no-frills operator, a sort of guy that will say it how it is. And I thought that was great to see. They won the collision there, and that was important because Nic White got front football. And if they can do that again, I get the feeling like they can win. They don't seem like they're scared playing South Africa. It's funny how sport can at times present teams that match up well against each other. And Reece Hodge wasn't particularly under much pressure yesterday. There wasn't a huge amount of contestable kicking. And it's because at times Australia gave away a truckload of penalties there, but they'd kick for the corner or they would miss chances for goals that, Hodge is still somewhat untested there. I think that they will, with more front football and challenging that, it'll present a different equation. There's so much excitement around these next couple of weeks, particularly now with New Zealand completely under the pump. Having lost 2 of 3 matches to date in the Rugby Championship, as well as that is what their fourth loss of the year, if memory serves, 4 from 6. So all sorts of drama happening across the ditch, which Michael Cheika has just gone, thank you very much, and he's brutally exposed some of the shortcomings at the moment over in New Zealand.
Yeah, perfect segue, mate. Just before we get there, though, 16-9 penalty account. So any South Africans out there perhaps questioning referee Paul Williams.
Yeah.
We know there was a couple of 50-50 calls, but to accuse him of being biased, as one particular Twitter follower of mine said, is just the definition of utter stupidity. Let's move to Christchurch. As we said, just a massive win for Argentina, the Pumas, Argentine rugby, and of course Michael Cheika. And let's not forget David Kidwell, because 96% tackle effectiveness was the Pumas yesterday. It was a blue and white wall. The All Blacks did score two tries. One was a rolling maul that Takeaho finished off, and the other was virtually the only time they looked like opening up the Pumas defence, scored by Caleb Clark in the first half. Emiliano Buffelli kicked all his penalties, was just striping them chalk and cheese with Andre Pollard, really, when you compare the two. And then an opportune moment off the kickoff taken by the back rower, who looks a real player there, alongside Marcus Creamer and, of course, Pablo Matera, who was just in love with Christchurch. It was a gripping encounter, fiercely contested at the breakdown. There's been a bit of a whinge on either side since then, but you've got to give it to David Kidwell. What an incredible coaching performance to put up a defensive wall like that on New Zealand soil.
Yeah, well, how similar was that to Parramatta 2 years ago?
Yeah,
look, it was on that afternoon in Parramatta. It was all Nico Sanchez there, and I think he scored a try there, quite an opportunistic try, and banged over penalty after penalty, and it came from the breakdown presence. And once again, that just completely disrupted the ball from New Zealand. They had no answer for it, did they? They didn't know how to resurrect that, overturn that, and overturn the momentum. And Cody Taylor, spare a thought for him. He's losing that last throw, caught not straight, huge.
Not the worst
moment.
one I've seen in the world, mind you.
No, not at all. And it's great for world rugby more than anything. And look, there will be people that are taking quite a bit of joy in what's going on, but I think more than anything, it's exciting because world rugby is so competitive. And you ask Sia Khaleesi and what he thinks of the Wallabies at the moment, and he goes, any international team at the moment can pretty much beat one another on any day. And we're seeing that at the moment take place. And I think that's so good for the game. It's breathing new life into it. And huge amount of pressure now on New Zealand. How they respond is going to be fascinating. But before we get there, you're right, David Kidwell deserves a lot of credit. Seems like he's loving it. I thought it was great, his reaction with Michael Cheika in the press box. This is perfect for Cheika. It's pretty much 15 months from getting his hands on these lost Pumas to taking him to a World Cup. And it's so similar to what happened in 2014-15 with the Wallabies.
Right in the sweet spot, isn't it?
Yeah, and you think about in 14, Ewan McKenzie wasn't sacked. He walked out, and he walked out for various reasons, but so did Mario Ledesma. He wasn't sacked. He was full. He walked out himself, probably mentally, physically burnt out from it through lockdowns and not playing a home test in Argentina for years. He's going to get these Pumas firing, and look, they could come up against the Wallabies, or England comes up against the Wallabies in a quarterfinal in 2023 in France, and that is going to be just must watch rugby. And but for, New Zealand, on the other hand, seem like they're back to square one almost, don't they? Like, where does Mark Robertson turn to at the moment? All the pressure is now going to be turning onto him, because you would look like a complete fool if you were to go away from Ian Foster now, when many people thought it probably should have been ended, that relationship there. I think it was all pretty predictable. There was always going to be a come down, wasn't there, after the real emotional response at Ellis Park?
Yeah, and as we said, mind you, we probably got it wrong thinking that that was going to be a serene passage for the rest of the tournament. I'll happily put my hand up and say I clearly underestimated Argentina, and what a fantastic win it was for them yesterday.
Before we go there further, look, I'm going to claim that I had money on Argentina, and they were paying 14 to 1.
How much?
I didn't put much on. I'm not gonna try to claim that I put a hell of a lot down on, but I did pick the first try scorer too. So it was a good afternoon.
Mate, your shout in Melbourne in a couple of weeks' time. Yeah, you're right. Where do they go? The pressure, the buck stops with New Zealand Rugby now. They've made their decision. The board's made its decision. We had the big showy press conference the other week where we're all pally once again, Ian Foster, Stuart Mitchell and Mark Robinson, as you said. And now, look, I've just read one particularly scathing piece on stuff.co.nz from Mark Hinton, longtime scribe with them in New Zealand, and just basically eviscerating New Zealand rugby. And the feeling, can you only imagine what the talk was on the streets yesterday of Christchurch walking out of Orange Theory Stadium, is that we've got this Ferrari in the shed and we're not taking it out in the Ferrari. That is, of course, Scott Razor Robertson. So, look, they can't go back now, can they? Like that's surely it, that they've made this decision. They said Ian Foster is our coach through to the Rugby World Cup in France in 2023, and now what is just a smidge over 12 months' time. What have we worked out? There's maybe 9-10 tests to go, New Zealand and Australia over the next 12 months. And have they completely bottled this decision? Look, the only way they get out of it from here is if Ian Foster goes and wins the World Cup next year with the All Blacks. Otherwise, this group of these people on this board, this New Zealand Rugby board, are going to be absolutely smacked from pillar to post, because already this looks like potentially the worst decision in New Zealand rugby history.
Yeah, and well, look, if they lose the Bledisloe, I think that'll be done. Look, I'm not going to suggest that it will, but I think that is the only kind of thing that would lead to a sudden overhaul immediately. If that was to happen, it would be crisis. There would be a lack of confidence. So I think the first person to go probably would be the CEO himself. There's huge pressure on Mark Robertson at the moment. And you're right, it's not just the talk in Christchurch, Razor country, it's the talk right across New Zealand, either side of the ditch and straight up to England as well. Because if Scott Robertson does go, as I said, I thought he might in 2023 up to England and potentially join Eddie Jones's coaching structure there. It'll just be a very odd look, and it could come back to bite them. But they've made their bed, haven't they? And that bed is with Ian Foster there for the time being. Huge drama. But I thought, Michael Cheika, before we kind of park that conversation, it's really important to say, what are Michael Cheika's strengths? And we touched on it before about this period of this great kind of sweet spot of 1, 2, 3 years sort of thing with teams. But what he does so well is he doesn't make it about him, even though it can be the Michael Cheika show. He doesn't make it about him. He makes it about his team. And we saw that when he was asked about what was sweeter, beating the Wallabies or beating New Zealand, beating the All Blacks in New Zealand for the first time. And he admitted, probably New Zealand, because it's the first time that he's done it. But immediately he said, but this is about now next week fronting up and going, well, if you're going to win a World Cup, you can't just do it 1 week. 1 week for Argentina is not good enough. It might be for Japan in 2015 when they're trying to show the world who they are. Argentina is a country, a proud rugby country that's been to a couple of semi-finals, that had a really disappointing showing in 2019, but now look like they are once again competitors, and that's great for rugby, but it shows Michael Cheika's great ability and his man management.
You know what it did make me think of, though, is that how he nailed himself to the mast there in 2019 with the Wallabies and playing attack at all costs. Yesterday we saw a fairly one-dimensional setup from Argentina, backing their defence, selective at the breakdown, taking their opportunities when they can. But it showed that he had the ability to coach in other fashions, or to run other game plans, if you like. And it just made me think of that and some of I think he got caught up in his own narrative there in 2019. And he's clearly had the reset. He's had time away. He's had time in rugby league, still with Lebanon. I assume that's still ongoing. He's got the League World Cup later in the year. But just having a fantastic year. And as I'm sure David Kidwell, as he told Sky Sport, I'm off for a few lemonades. Don't know whether you saw it, but there was a big, beautiful mural painted of him in Christchurch on a building wall last week. So Yeah, fantastic for the Pumas. But geez, it's going to be an interesting week following the media coming out of New Zealand. It's if that was scathing from Mark Hinton, then I only have scratched the surface of it in terms of my sweep. But it should be fascinating over the next few days, mate. I believe you're off to the BBL draft tonight, so we better let you get on the move. Better you than me. I loathe T20 cricket, so have fun there.
I will. Some big name cricketers and past cricketers there, and Ricky Ponting in co. So should be fun. And yeah, that was a great point there, highlighting the evolution of Cheika's coaching, and it was something that wasn't lost on Matt Giddo, I don't think. And if you haven't seen the tweet, check it out, because he did draw upon that. Well played Argentina, well played Michael Cheika, and indeed well played to the Wallabies for a good win. How these two nations now back it up is the $1 million question. And can't wait to talk about and see what transpires on both sides of the ditch, because a fascinating fourth round coming up in the Rugby Championship. So good to join.
Yeah, bring it on. Thanks, guys. That's it for this Sunday. Following round 3, we'll be back again after round 4. 2 fascinating games await, and we can't wait to bring you all the reaction and wrap up. Talk to you then.